The year was 1814, and England lay beneath a quilt of white, its fields hushed beneath the weight of snow and silence. The roads to Yorkshire were perilous, yet through that pale wilderness a modest carriage labored on, its wheels carving lonely furrows in the frozen mud. Inside sat Lady Lavinia Harcourt, once the pride of a fine London household, now reduced to the quiet dignity of a lady's companion. Her gloves were thin, her thoughts thinner still, worn from the journey that had carried her from comfort to humility. The air inside the carriage smelled faintly of lavender sachets and regret. Her father's ruin had been swift and merciless, whispered through drawing rooms like a disease. Debts, wagers, and a final betrayal at the gaming table had stripped the Harcourts of their estate and good name. When he died, his daughter inherited not fortune, but infamy. Only the benevolence of the Dowager Duchess of Wexford, an old acquaintance of Lavinia's late mother, had kept her from destitution. Thus, she traveled north to serve a woman who had once nodded to her across ballrooms as an equal. Wexford Hall emerged through the snow like a dream, turned to marble. The estate's great windows glowed with firelight, and carriages lined the forecourt like polished beasts at rest. Inside, servants bustled, anticipating the return of the Duke himself, Arthur Pembroke, a man said to embody both the hauteur and restraint of his lineage. It was rumored he had never smiled at folly nor forgiven error. Lavinia's heart tightened as she stepped into that glittering world. She reminded herself, not for the first time, that she was not arriving as a guest, but as an employee. Her first sight of the Duke came at dinner on the second evening, a gathering arranged to welcome him home from London and to prepare for the Prince Regent's envoy, who was expected within the week. Arthur Pembroke entered the dining hall with the quiet authority of one accustomed to command. His presence silenced the room as surely as snowfall smothers sound. Broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed, he moved with an economy of motion that suggested both discipline and disdain for frivolity. When the Dowager introduced her new companion, his gaze flickered over Lavinia with polite disinterest, lingering no longer than courtesy demanded. Yet in that brief moment, she perceived intelligence, cold, assessing, but not unkind. Dinner unfolded beneath the glittering sway of chandeliers. The conversation drifted from politics to art, from the coming royal visit to the merits of French lace. Lavinia, silent at first, was drawn in when the talk turned to history, her lifelong passion. The Duke, speaking of the Napoleonic Wars, misquoted a detail concerning a treaty's date. She corrected him gently, her voice steady despite the sudden stillness that followed. "If I may, Your Grace," she said, "the Treaty of Fontainebleau was signed in April, not March." The clink of silver ceased. A dozen eyes turned toward her. The Duke regarded Lavinia across the table, his expression unreadable. "Indeed," he said after a pause, "I stand corrected." But the words were cool, brittle as frost. The conversation resumed, yet beneath the laughter she felt the shift, the subtle exclusion, the weight of her own audacity pressing against her ribs. Later, in the ballroom where rehearsals were being held for the anticipated royal reception, the Duke's civility fractured. The musicians halted mid-waltz as he turned sharply toward her. "Miss Harcourt," he said, his tone measured yet edged with steel, "while your memory for treaties may be precise, I would remind you that precision alone does not confer standing. There are stations in life, and one must know one's own." The silence that followed was vast. The ladies tittered behind their fans. The gentlemen pretended interest in their shoes. Lavinia felt the sting of heat rise to her cheeks. "I beg your pardon, Your Grace," she replied softly. "It was not my intention to presume." He inclined his head, a gesture that might have been gracious had it not carried the weight of dismissal. "You are forgiven," he said, "but not fit to stand beside me." The words hung in the air like a blade suspended by a thread. The Dowager's hand trembled upon her cane. A servant dropped a tray in the far corner. Lavinia curtsied and withdrew, each step echoing against the marble like a tolling bell. That night, she wandered the terrace alone, the moon painting her figure in shades of pearl and shadow. The cold bit through her cloak, but pride forbade retreat. From within the great house came laughter, brittle, distant, untouchable. She had thought herself hardened to disgrace. Yet this new wound cut deeper than the rest. Not because of the insult, but because it came from a man whose approval, absurdly, she found herself craving. Behind the frost-laced windows, the Duke stood motionless. His gaze followed the slim figure beyond the glass, her breath rising in white ghosts against the night. Something within him stirred. Not pity, not admiration, but a disquiet he could neither name nor dismiss. He had been raised to mastery, to judge worth by lineage and decorum. Yet there was a steadiness in her bearing, a refusal to break beneath humiliation, that unsettled him more than defiance ever could. The snow thickened, veiling her in silver. He turned away abruptly, as if ashamed of his own curiosity, and poured himself a measure of brandy he did not drink. The house settled into sleep, but neither the Duke nor the woman he had wounded found rest. One stared at the dying fire, the other at the unyielding stars, two proud souls divided by the same frozen silence. And so, beneath the grandeur of Wexford Hall, amid whispers that could chill a reputation faster than any winter wind, an invisible thread had been spun, delicate, dangerous, and destined to tighten. The blizzard arrived without warning, sweeping across the Yorkshire hills like a ghostly army. By dusk, the world beyond Wexford Hall had vanished into white oblivion, the air filled with the low, mournful sigh of wind against stone. Inside, the fires burned higher, their light flickering against portraits of Pembroke ancestors who stared down in frozen judgment. The household, once preoccupied with the approaching royal visit, now found itself cut off entirely from the world. Servants murmured prayers for travelers still on the road, and guests resigned themselves to confinement. Among them was Sir Edmund Faversham, the Prince Regent's envoy, a man whose charm gleamed as brightly as his brass buttons. He was handsome, loud, and far too practiced in the art of pleasing an audience. Where the Duke's silence commanded respect, Faversham's laughter demanded attention. He had arrived only hours before the storm, his carriage half buried in snow, and quickly set about transforming the Duke's austere gathering into a stage for his wit. Lavinia, obliged to assist the Dowager in receiving guests, found herself the subject of his overfamiliar compliments before the first evening ended. An unexpected jewel in a northern crown, he called her, bowing low enough for the Dowager to arch an eyebrow. Lavinia answered with politeness, her tone steady though her hands trembled slightly as she refilled teacups. The Duke, seated by the fire, appeared unmoved. Yet beneath his stillness, something coiled. Not jealousy, not yet, but the faint tightening of disapproval. He had not spoken to Lavinia since the evening of her humiliation, and she had not sought him out. Their silence had become a form of truce, uneasy yet necessary. Days passed, marked by the relentless hush of falling snow. The guests settled into idleness, cards, gossip, and a languid repetition of old stories. Lavinia, refusing to succumb to restlessness, read aloud to the Dowager in the afternoons and organized small diversions for the stranded company. Her voice, low and melodious, carried through the drawing room as she recited verses from Byron and Cooper. Even the Duke, who pretended to write letters at his desk, found his pen motionless more than once, his attention drawn unwillingly to the cadence of her speech. It was during one of these quiet evenings that she discovered a gold cufflink near the library hearth, engraved with the Pembroke crest. She hesitated only a moment before seeking the Duke in his study. He looked up as she entered, the firelight drawing hard lines of shadow across his face. "I believe this is yours, Your Grace," she said, holding out her gloved hand. His gaze shifted to the small object, then to her. "It is," he replied. "You are observant." "Merely attentive," she answered. Their fingers brushed as he took it from her. The contact was brief, accidental, yet it lingered like an unspoken word neither could recall saying. The following evening, as the storm howled outside, Sir Edmund's attentions grew bolder. After too many glasses of brandy, He cornered Lavinia near the gallery staircase, his smile charming, but his eyes unfocused. "You must find life dreadfully dull here, Miss Harcourt," he drawled, stepping too close. "A clever girl deserves an admirer. Allow me to—" "Sir Edmund," she interrupted, voice low but firm, "you mistake civility for invitation." She moved past him, but he caught her wrist, not roughly, only with the careless entitlement of a man unaccustomed to refusal. She pulled free, her composure intact, though her heart raced. A maid passing by gasped at the sight, eyes wide with inference. By morning, the rumor had bloomed like frost on glass. The household hummed with whispers. The Duke heard of it before breakfast. He entered the morning room where Sir Edmund lounged by the fire, and the room fell silent. "You will apologize to Miss Harcourt," the Duke said, his voice controlled yet deadly calm. Faversham smirked. "My dear Wexford, it was nothing. The girl. She is not a girl," the Duke cut in, stepping closer. "And you will address her with respect, or you will not address her at all." The envoy's smirk faltered. For a heartbeat, Lavinia feared violence, but the Duke turned sharply on his heel and left without another word. The Dowager, alarmed by the rumors, advised Lavinia to remain discreetly in her chambers until the storm passed and gossip subsided. She obeyed, though the confinement felt like punishment undeserved. On the third night, restless and heartsore, she descended quietly to the library, where firelight still burned. The Duke was there, alone, his posture rigid, a book unopened before him. "I did not mean to intrude," she began. He looked up, the flicker of the fire catching in his eyes. "You are not intruding." His tone softened. "I regret that my house has been anything less than safe for you." "You need not concern yourself, Your Grace," she said quietly. "My reputation has already weathered greater storms." He rose then, slowly, as if measuring each word. "Miss Harcourt," he said, "you should not bear such disgrace in silence. The man who wronged you is beneath apology. But if there is blame to share, it lies partly with me, for allowing the whispers to touch you at all." Her composure wavered. "You owe me nothing, my lord." "And yet," he replied, stepping closer, "I find I owe you everything I value. Honesty, perhaps even respect." His gaze flickered, uncertain, almost human. "You have courage I lack." She searched his face, the hard lines softened by regret. "Your Grace," she murmured, "I do not require your defense." He answered after a pause, voice low as the storm outside. "And yet you have it unbidden." The silence that followed seemed to pulse with something neither dared name. Then a sound broke through, the distant creak of wheels over snow, a carriage approaching the gates. The Duke turned toward the window, his jaw tightening. "Another guest?" she asked. "No," he said, eyes narrowing at the dark shape emerging through the storm. "A messenger from London." Outside, the wind screamed across the moors as the horses drew nearer, bearing news that would shatter the fragile calm of Wexford Hall. The carriage that emerged from the blizzard bore the royal seal, its wheels caked with ice, its horses trembling from exhaustion. Within the hour, the messenger had been received in the Duke's study, where the fire burned low and tempers lower still. Lavinia, summoned by the Dowager to assist in composing letters, overheard only fragments as she passed the door. Misappropriation of funds the regent's envoy compromised, full inquiry to follow. The words were heavy with consequence. When she entered moments later, summoned by the Duke himself, the messenger's expression revealed everything. Sir Edmund Faversham had disgraced the crown, and by association, all who had sheltered him. The Duke dismissed the man with curt efficiency. As the door closed, he turned to Lavinia, his voice measured but his eyes alight with unease. "You understand what this means. Every guest in this house now stands beneath suspicion. And you," he hesitated, "you are already the subject of talk." Lavinia clasped her hands. "Then let them speak. Truth is not altered by rumor." His gaze lingered on her face, as though testing the strength of that conviction. "You have courage, Miss Harcourt. I wish I could borrow it." "Borrowing is unnecessary, Your Grace," she said softly. "You have it already. You simply disguise it as pride." For the first time, he smiled, faintly, unwillingly. It was a strange, disarming thing, like sunlight glancing through frost. But the moment shattered when the dowager entered, bearing new anxiety. London demanded explanation. The Duke was to present himself before the Prince's council within a fortnight. And because Lavinia had been entangled in Faversham's folly, she would be called to testify as witness. The weight of it pressed upon them both. In the days that followed, Wexford Hall grew quieter, its laughter extinguished. The storm abated, but within its stillness lay another kind of confinement. Lavinia spent her hours assisting the dowager, though her thoughts wandered constantly to the Duke. He moved through the house like a man haunted, courteous, precise, but inwardly restless. Once, she found him in the stables, his gloved hand resting against a horse's flank as snow drifted through the open door. "When I was a boy," he said without turning, "my father warned me that kindness weakens men of station. He was wrong about many things, but that one lesson I never unlearned." "You believe kindness weakness?" she asked. "I believe it dangerous," he said quietly. "It blurs boundaries." She took a slow breath. Then perhaps some boundaries deserve to be blurred. He looked at her, then really looked, and something in his gaze shifted. No longer the guarded appraisal of a superior, but the dawning awareness of an equal. Yet before either could speak again, a servant appeared to announce that London's messenger awaited the Duke's signature. The moment dissolved, leaving only the echo of words unsaid. That evening, as twilight folded over the estate, Lavinia wandered to the conservatory. The glass panes gleamed with condensation, the scent of hothouse roses clinging to the damp air. She had come seeking solitude, yet found the Duke already there, standing amidst the shadowed greenery. "You have avoided me," he said without accusation. "I have spared you discomfort," she replied. "It seems my presence brings only difficulty." "Not difficulty," he said, clarity. The admission startled her. He moved closer, his voice lower now, the austerity of command replaced by something uncertain. "You ask why I concern myself with your reputation. Perhaps it is because I once swore to despise everything that tempts me beyond reason." Lavinia felt her pulse quicken. "Tempt you?" He hesitated, then looked away. "My father married beneath him. The scandal nearly ruined our name. I told myself I would never repeat his folly. Love, I believed, was a luxury for those with nothing to lose." His tone softened. "And yet I find myself." She waited, breath shallow. "You find yourself what, Your Grace?" "Unable to forget you," he said. The words were quiet, stripped of authority. "Every restraint I have learned feels fragile when you are near. You undo me, Miss Harcourt, and I despise you for it." Her eyes glistened in the dim light. "Then despise me completely, Your Grace," she whispered, "for I cannot despise you at all." The air between them trembled. He reached for her hand, hesitated, the struggle between duty and desire visible in the smallest tremor of his fingers. But before contact could bridge the distance, the dowager's voice echoed through the corridor. "Arthur!" They parted instantly. The Duke turned, schooling his face to composure as the dowager entered, clutching a folded letter. "News from London," she said breathlessly. "The Regent himself has ordered inquiry. They summon you at once, and Miss Harcourt with you. It cannot be avoided." The Duke took the letter, reading swiftly. His jaw tightened. "They mean to make an example of someone," he murmured. "And we are convenient." Lavinia steadied herself. "Then we must face it with truth." He looked at her, the fire of resolve returning to his eyes. "Truth," he repeated, "the only thing they cannot strip from us." Outside, the last of the snow began to fall in soft, exhausted flakes. The storm had passed, but another, colder, more treacherous, gathered on the horizon. As the Duke sealed his reply to the Regent's summons, Lavinia felt the fragile stillness around them stretch to breaking. She turned toward the window, watching the pale light fade across the frozen fields. Somewhere within that darkness lay London and judgment. Behind her, the Duke spoke softly, his voice carrying the weight of unspoken vows. "When this is over," he said, Whatever becomes of my name, I will not allow them to diminish yours." She turned, meeting his gaze with quiet defiance. "And if your name falls with mine, your grace?" "Then let it fall," he said. "Perhaps it deserves to." The wind rose again, scattering the last petals from the hothouse roses. The hour had come for departure, though neither moved. In that fragile stillness, between ruin and redemption, both knew the course of their lives had already changed, not by scandal or decree, but by the dangerous, unspoken truth that no power on earth could silence. London, that winter, glittered like a city carved from frost and rumor. Every ballroom, every parlor, hummed with talk of the Duke of Wexford and the fallen baronet's daughter who dared to share his company. Lavinia arrived at the Pembroke townhouse beneath a gray sky that threatened snow once more. Though the journey from Yorkshire had been long, she held herself with quiet composure. The Duke, beside her in the carriage, spoke little, his jaw set in a line of resolve. Each knew that within hours they would stand before those who measured worth not by virtue, but by birth. At the Regent's reception that evening, the chandeliers blazed like captured suns, their lights striking off the diamonds of England's highest rank. The Duke entered first, his presence commanding as ever, though a strange stillness followed him. Lavinia trailed behind, her gown simple but elegant, a pale blue silk that caught the light like morning frost. The whispers began at once, murmurs fluttering through the room like restless wings. There she is, the companion, the Duke's scandal. Lavinia felt every glance as though it were a touch, yet she walked on, head unbowed. The prince's envoy awaited them at the far end of the hall, flanked by courtiers eager for spectacle. "Your Grace," he greeted coolly. "And Miss Harcourt, is it? The matter of Sir Edmund Faversham's conduct has reached His Royal Highness's ears. Your hospitality to that man, and certain rumors, must be accounted for." The Duke inclined his head. "We are here to account for them." His voice carried across the marble, steady and precise. Lavinia's heart tightened. The tone was not defensive but resolute, as though he had already chosen his truth and would not retreat from it. When her turn came to speak, she did so with clarity born of necessity. "Sir Edmund behaved in a manner unworthy of his post," she said. The Duke neither encouraged nor ignored it. He acted with honor to protect his household and all within it. Her gaze flicked toward Arthur, meeting his eyes only briefly, yet steadied her. "If blame is due, let it rest upon the man whose conduct invited disgrace, not upon those who endured it." There was a murmur among the gathered nobles. The envoy, surprised by her composure, turned back to the Duke. "And yet your defense of her has caused further scandal. It is said you struck the envoy." "I did not strike him," the Duke interrupted, "but I would have, had he spoken one word more against her." The stillness that followed was absolute. The Regent's representative blinked, uncertain whether defiance or loyalty stood before him. Then, perhaps amused by the sheer audacity, he dismissed them with a cool nod. "The prince will hear no further complaint. You are both free to depart." They turned to leave, but the whispers followed like a shadow. As they reached the center of the ballroom, a lady's voice, shrill with contempt, sliced through the silence. "Free to depart, yet not cleansed. How easily scandal clings when rank stoops to pity." Lavinia froze. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt, filled with the faint rustle of silk and malice. Before she could retreat, the Duke stepped forward. His voice, when it came, was quiet, the quiet that precedes thunder. "You mistake pity for admiration, madam. I have never pitied Miss Harcourt." He turned then, facing the assembled crowd, his expression unyielding. "You speak of birth and propriety," he continued, "but I have seen greater nobility in this woman's courage than in all the empty titles you guard so jealously." A hush fell, thick as snowfall. "You may call her what you wish," he said, his gaze sweeping across the glittering sea of faces, "but I call her the bravest soul I have ever known." And then, before anyone could breathe, he reached for her hand and kissed her, not a fleeting courtesy, but a declaration. The hall gasped, fans dropped, whispers ceased. It was a kiss born not of rebellion, but of truth, a single act that shattered the cold conventions of 1,000 watchful eyes. For an instant, time seemed to falter, the music, the movement, the measured pulse of society itself. When he drew back, Lavinia stood motionless, her heart pounding with disbelief and wonder. The regent's envoy, recovering first, gave a wry smile. "Well," he murmured, "if England must have a scandal, let it at least be conducted with style." Laughter rippled, tentative at first, then genuine. The Duke bowed slightly, guiding Lavinia toward the exit as though nothing at all were amiss. Yet in that brief walk across polished marble, the world had altered its course. Weeks later, the snow still lingered upon the Yorkshire hills when Wexford Hall awoke to the sound of bells. The Duke and Lady Lavinia were wed in the small chapel overlooking the frozen lake, the ceremony attended only by family and a handful of trusted friends. The scandal that had once threatened them now seemed distant, reduced to a tale told with admiration rather than disdain. After the vows were spoken, they stepped into the pale winter sunlight. The ground shimmered beneath a thin crust of frost, the air crisp with promise. Lavinia's hand rested in Arthur's as they walked the familiar terrace where months before she had stood alone in shame. Now, beneath the same wintry sky, dignity had transformed into grace. He paused by the balustrade, turning to her with a quiet smile. "Do you remember what I said the night we first quarreled?" She met his gaze, eyes alight. "You said I was not fit to stand beside you. And I was a fool," he said simply. "You were never unfit. I was unworthy to stand beside you." Her lips curved into a trembling smile. "Then we are both redeemed, my lord, you by humility and I by the chance to forgive it." He laughed softly, the sound warm against the cold air. A fair exchange, then. As they turned toward the house, the church bells rang again, their tones echoing across the valley like the thawing of a long-held silence. The narrator might have said that love, once frozen by pride, had at last found its spring. For in that season of snow and second chances, the Duke of Wexford and Lady Lavinia Harcourt proved what even England's rigid heart could not deny, that true nobility lies not in birth, but in the courage to love without permission.